It's not going to matter anyways. I mean, why bother? That came up in conversation. Somebody said that, my next door neighbor, a few years ago. The rationalization for that line, why bother, was yet another vote, yet another issue. The vote was a larger one. It passed. It meant that a huge, sprawling school would be built for the future of our children, the future of a town called Lambertville in New Jersey. But there was one small problem. You see, children weren't coming in. In fact, if you look at some of the statistics for that town at that time, attendance at public school was dropping, not increasing. So here they were, small town in America, building a new facility for kids that they didn't have. No one suspected they may actually need, all to the tune of $40 million to the taxpayers' coffers and burden. My next door neighbor went on. He said, who would be crazy enough to vote for this? $40 million. I have a kid in public school, and the current school just seems to be fine. It's working well. Why do away with what's been working? It'll never pass. It's a non-issue. Plus, that also means that I myself had to take the time out, go down to the school, vote. I don't have time for that. Somebody else will take care of it. So the time came, the resolution was on the docket, the issue was on the docket, and believe it or not, it passed by one single solitary vote. My next door neighbor's kicking them still. Now half of the residents are stuck in the darkness, the burden of forking over quite a bit of money, $40 million facility, not something, of course, that they wanted to do. One voice, one vote, just one little thing showing up could have made all the difference. In our readings today, to be sure, it seems like my next door neighbor should have had that pep talk that Jesus had, that the disciples needed to hear. In the Gospel of John, the disciples are right before that mock trial, that death of Jesus, that whole Holy Week. Lord knows what they're going to be persecuted for. And Jesus gives them a little bit of a pep talk. He says, believe in the light. You are children of the light. Pep talk for what's about to happen. But it's also based on the past. I say based on the past because if the disciples were paying attention, it was the same theme that Jesus preached on the Sermon on the Mount. A large crowd was gathered together in Matthew 5. Thousands, and Jesus told them, what? You are light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. And yet here they are in the Gospel of John. Only a remnant of that crowd. Good Friday, Holy Saturday, what is about to come to pass at that time? There's 12, maybe 20 of them that stuck to the very end. The crowd that he preached to turned on him. At best, they dispersed. At worst, they just spat on Christ while he died. And soon enough, over the few days for the disciples, that pep talk, you hope, would be instilled in them. You are children of the light. For their mettle will be tested in ways worse. They will find themselves in darkness. And if you've ever been in total darkness, what's the feeling that you have? Not comfort, but you feel small. You feel inadequate. You feel as if, well, my one voice, my one vote, my one candle against the darkness, it's not going to matter that much. Friends, this is the feeling that we have when we go out into the world. There's an inexorable tide against culture, against change, against darkness. I want you to notice another thing, though, that Jesus prescribes in that pep talk, John 12. There's no quote where Christ says in those times, you've got to dig deep. You've got to draw down from your gut or your pockets. Do more, be more. Write checks. Fund expeditions for the glory of Christ. Christ never says those lines. Why? because God knows best. You see, we all have deep down inside of us what we call a fear, and it's a fear of doing. That fear is named insecurity, inadequacy. We say, that little small voice in the back of our brains say, we are just one person. We're just a small fry. It's actually hit the popular context today. It's called imposter syndrome. Have you ever heard of it? It's tossed around primarily because people today don't feel as if they have the required stuff, strength, intellect, mental fortitude, willpower to be at the position that they are in today. They are not enough. They feel they are inadequate. But what if your deepest fear isn't inadequacy? What if it's something else? 4-time New York Times bestseller, lady by the name of Marianne Williamson, spoke one time of our deepest fear. And it's not inadequacy. It's that we are powerful beyond measure. You are powerful beyond measure. Does that track with you? Probably not. We trend to think that we are so small, to believe we are so small. And we just say, what good is one voice, one vote, one man against the darkness? So we do ourselves the disservice. And in a way, we build up blockage on our own pride. We have pride in being what? Not big, but small. Imagine that. We value our own limitations. We praise them. We lift them up on the same table, on the same pedestal as God. We make them a God. And in the end, they rule over us. How do I know this? Well, let me say this. What is the most important artifact for you in your life? What is the tell-all, be-all in your life? That's incredibly hard to break. What 2 words controls your life right now? I'm going to go out on a limb and guess those 2 things. One is a calendar. And the second thing, the 2 words is, I'm busy. Our limitations, our inadequacy, are saying that we are overworked, overbusy, overcommitted. Our calendar's full. Has now not become a cross, but a badge of honor for us. Overwork has become a credential of prosperity. Those aren't my words. That's James Surowiecki from The New Yorker that wrote that in an article. Our unavailability due to limitations, and therefore our own inadequacy, has become our God with a little g. So we say, we're just 12 people. We can't do that. We can't overextend. We just have one voice. We only have one small candle. So pervasive is this in our culture today of inadequacy that there's a word for this. In Japan, the word is karoshi. And when this little god, when karoshi takes, it takes and takes and takes and brings you to the darkness. Karoshi, by the way, means death from overwork. There's a Japanese word for death from overwork. And it's logged in that hundreds of people from Japan die from karoshi each year. Death by overwork, limitation, inadequacy, busyness, calendar. You can go down that path if you want, consciously or unconsciously. And yet Jesus does not say, you can be light of the world. You just gotta do more. You can be children of the light. You just gotta do more. He says, you are. There's no intent. There's no doing. It's only being. So what's the problem then for us today? Oh, I can just be light. Even in the children's sermon, one of the kids said it. How do you be light? What's the problem? Growing up in the days before flashlights on your cell phones, if you had just a regular old flashlight, one of those mag lights, I was trying to find one of those big mag lights that usually, plumbers or stationary engineers used to carry around with them. Something happens in that eventually to any one of these lights. The battery starts to fade, the light starts to dim. And I remember when I was younger that this happened to me. But the strangest thing is that it happened to a perfectly good and fresh pack of batteries that I even put in. I said to my dad, "Hey, what gives? I just put in new batteries. D-cell batteries. Why isn't the light working? I just paid $10 for D-cell batteries. They better work." You know what he did? He took the flashlight and he went, well, hopefully he didn't break it. But he just smacked it. He just tapped it. And guess what? No, the flashlight started working again somehow. Bright as ever, just like a TV, somebody else said. Nothing was wrong with the batteries. Nothing was wrong with the light itself. It turns out there's a science to this. Because if and when, just after being a flashlight for so long, moisture, humidity starts to build up, the metal conductors inside, guess what? They start to rust, they start to corrode. There's stuff that starts to gum up the metal spring and the parts that connect the battery to the light. And so when you actually hit that switch on, you aren't making the batteries work harder. Instead, what do you have to do? You have to get the dirt, the crud, the rust off of the components, and hallelujah, the light shines again. The connection just needs to be reset. The same with us. We go, well, our light isn't big enough. We aren't by our own consciousness, by our own power, by our own intellect producing enough light. The batteries must not be big enough then. The bulb must not be bright enough then. Whereas we just needed a little thump to say that it's not by your own inadequacy, folks. It's not by your own power or agency. You don't do anything. Rather, it's about what inside of you, and therefore your connection, that is what matters. Is your connection corroded? Have you spent too long in the moisture, in the darkness? Have you gummed up your contacts, so to speak? Too long in the darkness where your light dims, then you have to ask yourself, what's making me feel afraid? What is it that's controlling me? What is it that is silencing my voice? And you may think around you it's the current crisis, the current administration, the current, whatever it is, family situation. But more than likely, it's your connection to God that is gummed up. So how do we register that thwack, that nudge, that bump of Jesus just getting our light going, of that spiritual electrical conduit and circuit being complete? Well, John writes a letter to a community, his first letter to this community, 1 John, to a group of people that have felt the same exact way you probably feel now, and I do. It's a community that's been ostracized, small, marginalized, in the shadow of Rome, shadow of an empire, in the shadow of the Jewish religion. They're on the outs. Inadequacy runs rampant. And yet to this community of light, these children of light to the darkness, as it says in 1 John chapter 1, he tells them to love, to just love a little more. The term he uses is agape, love. And as you know, it's not a love of feeling, emotions, lust. Rather, it's a love that's based off of self-giving sacrifice. In 14 verses, he used that word almost 30 times, 29 times. And each is supposed to be like a jolt on your flashlight. This type of love runs counter to our perceived inadequacies and inabilities, because there's no doing factor. We're all born into it. That type of language means not doing, but being. How many of you today did all the work while you were being born? Did your mom say, well, I just sat back and let my child, let Junior do all the work? I don't think that happened, right? It doesn't happen. This kind of love is just given to us. We are born into it, which means we did very little to perform for it. And just like how we're born into a family, not by our inadequacies or by strength or by power, it's just because. So the true solution is just to be, which means that you just have to live a little more and love a little more out of sacrifice. Day by day, grow out of the busyness mindset, the calendar mindset, grow into the connection of God, and it works wonders. Live 29 times more than you did before. Love 29 times more than you did before. Not because you feel as if you don't have enough, but that it's coming from a well of light, a power source that is infinite and beyond measure. I like to check. Hello? Oh, there we go. I like to come down and talk to you, of course, to wrap it up, to wrap up the service. When we, instead of doing out of our own inadequacy and our power, instead we are charged with being through God's power, something wonderful happens. Something changes because we feel ownership. But because it's God's power, there's no longer a limitation based on what we can do. And in some ways, this idea and act of being, of ownership, reminds me actually of an ancient Native American tradition. It happened in almost every culture, but I'm just selecting, let me say it differently. The Pawnee tribe, part of the Blackfeet tribe in the plains areas. You see, back before we had electricity, flashlights and the like, the one thing that stemmed against the darkness apart from the sun was what? Was fire. And believe it or not, they had one person who was the fire carrier. So what they would do is every morning, hopefully it didn't sound like that, every morning they would take just one coal from the fire that they bedded down. They would put it in a horn along with some like little paper and straw, and they would carry that coal to the next stop along the way, because they were a nomadic tribe. And so each and every night, they were provided for that fire, that again, abatement against the darkness, because they kept one coal going from one to the next to the next. You could say that that fire went on for hundreds of years, just from one specific coal. Why am I telling you a story about a tradition of an ancient Native American tribe for so very long? You're probably wondering. It's because somewhere, somehow, some person today influenced you from 5, 10, 20 years ago. Maybe even today, somebody came off of the street and it charged you with carrying the coal in a way, carrying the light of Christ. Something happened to you where you said, this is different. Or maybe that hasn't happened yet. Maybe you're saying, there's something different about that place. This place, I mean. And so, you think about that person. It means that you are the next generation. Within it, you have that fire, that coal inside of you to carry on to the next person, to help abate against the darkness. This time around, not coming from, plains, predators, and things like that, but coming from the darkness of this world.
is charged with you. It just means you really don't have to do much. It just means you have to love a little more. It means that your one voice or vote or whatever it is, one action for today does matter. But friends, it also means that you have to give up the idea of inadequacy that is so very much within you. That idea of busyness and that calendar mentality that you'll have to put down. I think you can do it, because I've done it. Will you? Will you be the light shining in the darkness, the one person carrying the coal to weather the storm and trials of life, to continue on for another generation? That choice is yours, for you are light of the world. Amen.